There was, are we good? These are my guys. There was so much misinformation in what Bo just said. I really don't even know where to start. My name is Ken Wilgus, and I think other than that, I don't think anything else he said was right. But I will definitely agree that Bo and I have been close friends for a long time. He and Stacy mean a lot to both of us, but Bo has meant just, I can't get into it, just a great deal in my spiritual life. So let me tell you what we're going to do. So I started praying for you guys several weeks ago. It's always weird when I pray for a group and then I'm finally here and seeing you. It's like, oh, okay, this is what you look like. There's a lot more of you than I thought there were going to be, that's for sure. But secondly, this has kind of taken a different turn over time because of what is happening in our country. And so what I like to do is to give a seminar with lots of practical, specific, fun tweaks you can do. But that's not really what we're going to do. There'll be plenty of that for questions. But prayerfully, I really have to start by telling you there are important things that you need to think about, especially you parents of smaller children, about what we mean by Christian parenting that is not the same as good parenting. I'm 64. I grew up in Richardson, Texas, and it was a time, and maybe we were foolish, but we used to feel like you can be kind of a good American family and then also do church and accept Jesus as Savior, and you're good. And that was kind of a path you could do. You cannot do that anymore. This country is not, and again, I don't want to add this whole everything's terrible thing, but I do want to be specific about the changes that need to happen now, because as Christian parents, you feel it, but I want to hopefully clarify for you the areas that you need to boldly be different, because the way we see how our children should be raised and the things that are important for them will very likely not be the same as your very cool, very nice neighbor that does church, you know, the one that goes every once in a while. It's fine, but you will not be the same as them. Our goals and our path and even what we mean by being parents is more and more different than ever from regular American parents. So that's why I started with this first program that's going to take a little while. We may we're going to do two parts. The first is really hopefully to start a conversation that I hope will go on after tonight amongst yourselves, with your leaders, about ways that you can support each other in parenting, but to reevaluate your goals. Secondly, in the second part will be easier, which is a big part of what I do, which is recognizing the stages and the differences as your children get older, which will make you more effective as a parent. That's where my book comes in. But this first part, and even before I start talking about this, I have to first mention my concern about parenting. Hold on. We worked on this. Yeah. Boom. Before I talk anything, I have to first talk about parenting, because I know you. You're really worried about how you're doing as parents. I get tearful moms of adult children. One that was just a few weeks ago, her older daughter had filed for divorce. This kind of surprised her. And she came to my office and wanted to know what I did wrong. I said, what do you mean? Well, she had this younger son that she and her husband had been working for years. He had an addiction. They knew that he was a struggle, but their older girl she was going to make it. And then now she's filed for divorce. What did I do? Now, I should point out, I don't get dads coming to my office going, what did I do? They don't do that. But moms particularly feel this burden of what I do is the outcome of my children. Their outcome depends on me. And I always start with the logic, which is, well, how about this? If children's outcome is based on their mother, then I guess if you're a bad mother, it's your mother's fault. So don't worry about it. That's just logic. Never comforted. Never, it's like, no, it's me. So we have to first start with this kind of assumption about parenting and thinking about this burden of parenting. In the years since World War II, this is John Rosemond, we have become increasingly and neurotically obsessed with the raising of children. Along the way, child rearing has become parenting with all its high pressure implications. Parenting wasn't even invented until 1959. I mean, you think about it, we just think, well, then it was child raising, child rearing, child care. But parenting is a little like, you ever see the word adulting used? Went to the bank, washed my car, paid my taxes, #adulting, which I always think is so dumb. Like, yeah, you're an adult and you're acting. That's what parenting is. You're a parent. The things that parents do is what parenting is. That's not what you think about with parenting anymore. Because what we're dealing with now is essentially this science of child rearing. Can we just click that? What am I doing? This is going to be annoying. Okay, the business of scientific child rearing. And that's kind of my business, but I want to be super clear with you about the idea that there's this special set of techniques or that you can do that will make your children good. This isn't going to work. So are we going to just go to all right. The promise of parenting is that there's some set of techniques, some particular expertise that parents could acquire that would help them accomplish the goal of shaping their children's lives. This is not going to work. That's from a manifesto against parenting. There is almost no evidence that any of this has much predictable effect on what children will be like when they grow up. The idea that you can shape your child to be way better than he or she would have been if it weren't for you has never been demonstrated to be true. Like, did you know, were you around when they first started talking about listening to classical music when you're pregnant? Because your infant, your unborn child will have better cognitive development. Did you ever follow up to find out, did that turn out to be true? No, there is no evidence of that. Now, don't get me wrong, you can screw your kid up. You can really go the other way. That's not what that's not what we're talking about. You don't feel pressure because I worry that locking her in the closet for 2 days or I shouldn't be beating them with a belt. That's not what you're worried about. You're worried about subtle things. That thing that you heard your friend had read the book and I didn't even know we're supposed to be doing that. That's what we're talking about. What you think about as failing is that I didn't do that technique, that thing that would have ensured their development. That's not a real thing. And you're hearing that from me. I'm a shrink. I do this. And there are things that can help you be a more effective parent, but we're not talking about, and nothing I'm talking about tonight should affect that feeling of, oh no, he's told me something I'm screwing up. I hate that. People come to my office, like the vice principal. I come out and they're like, parents, they're like, yeah, well, we haven't been doing what's in your book. And, like I'm going to go, well, I don't know what I can do for you. As if, there's some really specific thing that they've screwed up. That's not real. So I don't want to go any further, especially as Christians. It can't be real. That idea that God has given you this child and has stood back as if God can stand back and cross his big fingers and hope you don't screw up, that's not our faith. Jesus is here in this room. There's got to be just two of us in his name here. That's all you need. And he's here. He's with you. And you're not even with your children now. He is. The Holy Spirit is with you, not you. But so that whole feeling is unreal, and I don't want to add to that burden any more than it already has been. All right, so you might think about, are you making, shaping, or raising your child? Like, what are you trying to do? My parents were really good parents. They did a great job. I guarantee you they never worried about their parenting. They just raise children, like you raise livestock. You just bring them up and sell them off. It was not that deep self-consciousness that you have. What ends up happening, and this is a good quote from How to Land Your Kid in Therapy. It was a great article. Many parents will do anything to avoid having their kids experience even mild discomfort, anxiety, or disappointment, with the result that when, as adults, they experience the normal frustrations of life, they think something must be terribly wrong. There is a way to overdo this, to be over-concerned about how you're doing that actually isn't even good for your kids. So again, I just want to make sure that we're not adding to that when I talk to you tonight. Got it? If you think of it scripturally, it's probably somewhere between Proverbs 22, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he's old, he'll not depart from it, which, by the way, if you've looked that up, there's like multiple versions of what that means. But it definitely includes that how you raise your children affects them. But it's also important to remember Ezekiel 18, the son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself. There are no grandchildren in heaven. God has each of us as his child, and you cannot drag your child to the throne of grace. And I know there are some who have already experienced perhaps adult children that are not in the faith, and you have that feeling like, I screwed that up. That cannot be. It is our faith that Jesus has told us, you did not choose me, I choose you. We move to God by his calling to us. It is not a parenting technique. So you have an effect, and I'm not going to minimize that, but it's not all up to you. Got it? Have I been clear enough? Okay, because I don't want to add to that. All right, now let's move on. Did we all see the Barbie movie? Oh, come on. All right. Here's the thing. The Barbie movie is a great parable of everything that's wrong in our culture. So don't go with people that are undiscerning, but it's a great conversation starter, mostly about the role of women, and it's a mess. It is just exactly the problems that our culture is having. The funny part is, it's a brilliant screenplay. Greta Gerwig is this brilliant feminist chick. But here's the part that's really weird. If you see the movie, spoiler alert, there's this one dull scene. It's the Pinocchio moment, spoiler alert, where Barbie is asking, in this case, that's Rhea Perlman, who is playing the part of Barbie's creator, and she asks, how do I become human? And it's this, kind of like white background, heavenly thing. And she says, just feel. What? And people, if you look on the internet, there are people that, the most glorious scene. It's the dumbest part of the whole dumb script. But it's almost like an obligation in our culture that you gotta say the thing, and this is what's important, that everyone is worshiping in America. And it is what we'll call expressive individualism. The religion of this country is expressive individualism. Your good neighbor, your cool people that are really good parents, that are really on the top of stuff, are all about this. And if you're not careful, so are you. Expressive individualism is basically this. Holds that each person has a unique core of feeling and intuition that should unfold or be expressed if individuality is to be realized. Now, I'm not going to go all into that today. Some of you that want to get more into it, I just got this literally as we drove out. Carl Trueman wrote, you can get Strange New World, or if you really want to get the deep dive, the big book, which is called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, but it's Carl Trueman, and those of you that like this kind of stuff. The point is, he's going to tell you that this is what is giving rise to all of probably the biggest difference in how we see things and how most Americans now are beginning to see things. And it's expressive individualism. And the reason I mentioned the Barbie movie is because it's everywhere. That was just one part of it. If you ever watch cartoons or shows for children, it always contains this little bowing at the altar of you be you. Be your real self. You're a hero. You can do, you can hear it. You know what I'm talking about? It's everywhere. And here's the important thing. We cannot just add on to that you are great, you're good, oh, and you need Jesus. You can't do that. Those are not the same thing. And that's what I want to be really clear. So especially for you parents of younger children, this infects our parenting. So you may have heard of gentle parenting. Have you ever heard of that? I hear this more and more from parents of young people. Gentle parenting is a catch-all for the variations that include respectful parenting, mindful parenting, intentional parenting. In its broadest outlines, gentle parenting centers on acknowledging a child's feelings and the motivations behind challenging behavior, as opposed to correcting the behavior itself. Do you know what I'm talking about? It is the thing that says when your 2-year-old punches her sister in the nose, that you get down and go, hey, I know you're frustrated, but we should find a better way to, and then when she punches you in the nose, you say, hey, I know you're feeling like you wanted, and you repeat, and you actually name the inner feeling. That's important, name the feeling. And then so that by that self-knowledge of your feelings, remember, just feel, that's what humans are, that through that you will find negotiated better behavior. That is really what's out there now. Do some of you know what I'm talking about? Do you see the TikToks or the different channel, there's Good Inside, there's just a number of them. What's a little concerning for me is that many of these are, while they are therapists, a lot of these are mothers that have little children themselves. They haven't even finished raising their children. And I will admit, Bo is right. My children are great. But Sally and I will both tell you, they weren't that hard. It's not like we did fine. We did. But we screwed stuff up. It's not like, I'm telling you this because I've raised children perfectly. It's because it would be weird if my kids were in jail. That would be weird for me to be up here. But secondly, I have done this with 1,000 parents. I know what is effective and what isn't. And this is, at the very best, untried. And why are we doing this? Because it fits the age of individualism. So, gentle parenting, this is an example from Brain Body Parenting. She actually says this: when my body budget was in a deficit, I'd sometimes say things I later regretted, projecting my own lack of internal resources onto my kids. Hurry up, you're making us late. Stress and exhaustion turned me into an authoritarian and controlling mom. God forbid you would ever say to your children, hurry up, you're making us late, because you've shown your disequilibrium and then they are it's outrageous. And ironically, one of my favorite articles about this is called The Harsh Realm of Gentle Parenting. It was in the New York Times or New Yorker. And it's like parents are already going, this is kind of weird. I don't think we can do this. They're failing left and right. This is what presses this: expressive individualism. Humans are your feelings, and knowing your feelings is how you genuinely and authentically become yourself. What this used to be was essentially the self-esteem movement, which had a start that was pretty good. That was when I was studying and we were raising our kids. Self-esteem was the big thing. And you still worry about your kid's self-esteem, don't you? That's very much similar. If your kid is really low self-esteem, has been through abuse, really has constant, terrible, told they're horrible, yelled at, been through real abuse, then they can develop a sustained self-image that is harmful. But that's not really where the movement went to. The movement was about that if you had high self-esteem, you could do all kinds of things. And after decades of research, improving self-esteem has been popular self-help content for years, and many people still align happiness well-being, and success with high self-esteem. As it stands, however, psychologists are increasingly questioning the touted benefits of raising self-esteem. Yeah, I can tell you that it is not a useful corollary of going, well, I think she has low self-esteem. First of all, if you have a kid in junior high who doesn't have low self-esteem. The funny part is, I see anywhere from that poor outcast kid, which was me, to the head cheerleader and whatever you think is tops. Guess what? They don't feel great either because you're in junior high. It's like not good. So the idea that if we can just raise that self-esteem, it'll all go well, that did not pan out to be true. As a matter of fact, efforts to boost self-esteem of pupils have not been shown to improve academic performance. Boosting your self-esteem does not improve academic performance and may sometimes be counterproductive. People high in self-esteem claim to be more likable and attractive, to have better relationships, and to make better impressions on others than people with low self-esteem, but objective measures disconfirm most of those beliefs. Do you hear what that's saying? I remember when the American math high school students competed with the world high school students in math, and we scored, I forget, 20th or something, but we were number one in our confidence about how we felt in our math. Great. Don't over-concern yourself with how your child sees themselves, and especially with the artificial idea that regardless of what's actually happening in your child's life, as long as they feel good about themselves, everything will go great. That's not been proven. Now, I'm not going to discount it completely. Self-esteem does relate to being more applied and for longer. You'll try harder and longer. But I would definitely not overdo that because self-esteem was probably one of the earlier aspects of this expressive individualism. This is where it gets to today. Gender and sexual identity is a huge issue. But you need to think about this. There is nobody out there telling your teenager, hey, you should be gay, or you should be trans. Nobody is saying that. What they are saying is you should be you. You should be your true self. Most of your teenage children that wander from the faith is not going to be because they're gay or trans. It'll be because they think that our religion is exclusion. It excludes those that just happen to be gay or trans. Do you hear what I'm saying? That is, again, part of expressive individualism. There is a real you, a North Star of you inside, that if you will bravely know who that is and pursue that, even against the oppression of groups trying to tell you who you are, that is the path to flourishing. So that's how this whole the whole issue of expressive individualism becomes an issue like we have today. It's funny because you'll have people say, how can you not be in agreement with transgender ideology since all the major medical associations have all come out in favor of that? Do you know that? That's very true. All of them have in, I think, 5 years or less. That's faster. So we're talking about rethinking human sexuality, the basics of male and female, which has been throughout time. We have now flipped that over in less than 5 years. I think the discovery of germs took longer for science to fully accept. It's happened just like that. There's only two possibilities. One, there's some incredible scientific discovery, some microscope that discovered something we never saw before that we all went, yep, I guess so. Or there's cultural pressure that says you better get on board or else. And I think you know that it's been disappointing for me as one of those associations of my people. I think psychologists are smart, but we're not brave. When you know that this is wrong, this is not science, but you're going to get canceled if you keep pushing against it, we have not done great. And you know, it's who would expect different? This is a guy talking about the American Association of Pediatrics has come to see its role as an agent of radical social reform, not a professional organization of physicians and a gatekeeper of medical knowledge. The reason To put it simply, is that it has allowed a postmodern politics of identity to infiltrate and shape its scientific and medical judgment. That's expressive individualism. You must fall in line. And your children, again, will vary. The most common thing that young people talk to me about, their objection to our faith, is that it's exclusionary. It doesn't allow for this true north of who people actually are inside. So people who do not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth, you may not know this, are 3 to 6 times as likely to be autistic as those that are, by the way, cisgender is another word for normal, according to the largest study yet examined. This doesn't come without cost. What ends up happening is if you believe that how you know yourself inside and how you feel inside is the true you, then what about people that are struggling socially, like those with moderate autistic features? There's a very high percentage that get eaten up by this. Someone tells them, they go from, I don't know me, but I read this, and they start identifying. There's a huge number of people that are getting absorbed in the whole ideology of, again, not just trans, not just the sexual identity, but you have a true you, and humans are defined by just feel. This is not what I was raised with. And again, it's not like things were great when I was a kid. Ask any minority in this country. It wasn't great in the 60s. But I think the biggest difference is that it was not as invisible in the distinction from neighbor to from the guy next door. So I want to talk about then of what are the distinctions, the distinctives of Christian parenting. And I don't think that's a word, is it? It should be distinctive somethings, but I just like the word, distinctive. The things that actually make Christian parenting not the same as good parenting. So, for example, we have awareness of our subjective experience. It's not that we need to push back and say, look, feelings will take you the wrong way, just don't worry about all that stuff. First of all, none of your children are going to listen to that. But secondly, we don't have to worry about it. In our faith, we do obviously experience our own discomforts, our own subjective experience, like anxiety, like impulsivity, like anger and fear. Those are all parts of your children's life, and there's nothing that says that you need to just ignore all that. But one of the huge things that we also acknowledge is, that is not acknowledged in the subjective, is sin nature. We are born sinful. And obviously the basis of sin is missing the mark. It is disobedience to God. But what you can feel in your own life is your shame and your pride. Your children, if left to their own devices, will eat you up. They want to own the thing that is not theirs. They want to control you. It's nothing to be stunned by. This is often what I think is surprising with parents of young children that are really surprised that my kid just comes up and takes stuff right out of the other kid's hand. I'm like, yeah, that's what kids do. It's not surprising. And it's weird that it does surprise parents more now. You know why it shouldn't be surprising? Because you know that. You have that yourself, don't you? You know that thing that you're pretty good at, but then you come across someone that's better than you, and you know that feeling that, well, I mean, I could have been, whatever, that I want to take that from you as well. That's what we all have. So it shouldn't be surprising that our children are born sinful, because we are sinful. And parenting children is both participating in their sanctification process, which means dealing with their sin, but it's also our sanctification as parents in going through this with our children. So sin nature is written about, look, it's like Paul, I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. We're old enough in this room. Do you know what he's talking about? I mean, it has just been crazy at different points in my life. The very thing that I know I mustn't participate in, I shouldn't let my thoughts go there, and I do. And it happens our whole life. We can and should discuss our inner experience. But at the same time, we also know that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? This is rarely talked about, if ever, when it comes to parents. And I think it's important that you not be afraid to discuss that. Again, it's not saying that we are calling our kids bad names or being ugly. It is part of being Christian parents and telling the truth about our inner nature. David said, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. It's not something that you do as sins. It's who you are. It's part of the tribe of sin. So with that as part of our inner experience, again, it's important to know the difference between your child's deliberate disobedience and impulsive behavior. It's important to know the difference between disobedience or noncompliance and anxiety. Those things all exist within them as well, but it is also important to watch and not be surprised with, there it is, my kid is doing the very thing that I said not to, just to see what you're going to do about it. That is also what our children do. We shouldn't be shocked by it, and we'll talk later about by not being shocked, I mean you don't need to be upset and angry about it. You need to act and help them to control themselves. But this also means that, and this is important, that means the direction that you're teaching your children to go is not self-fulfillment. It concerns me that there is even Christian talk about being all that you can be, which is kind of true as long as you're really careful about what does that mean, because that comes pretty close to expressive individualism, this kind of being fully yourself. That is not our faith. If anything, our belief is in death of self. What do I do with this self? For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. You're old enough to know what that means. You know that thing that you fought, and you finally recognize that I can't make myself good. All I have is Jesus, and I have to count on him. And for me, it was moments of, you could just hear everyone in heaven going, well, finally, he's given up on being good, and he's just hanging on to Jesus, and it was a major step for me. My biggest failures have definitely been my deepest spiritual growth. Do you know what I mean? It is so hard for me to not wake up with that automatic feeling of, I'm trying to be a better person. Forget it. You're not going to make it as a better person. I've been a good father. I mean, I think my kids would say so. I thought I was going to be a great father. I really did. I'm not. I said stuff I should not have said. And I didn't do some stuff I really should have done. But you know what? I have Jesus, and it's good enough. I definitely thought I was going to be a great husband. I did, because that woman is the only person I ever wanted. Great. Not good. Stuff I've said to her and done is just outrageous. You don't try to be good. It is Christ in me. And the more that I recognize that this me must be put away and die, and Christ in me lives, that's our faith. Do you know that? It is not anything like self-fulfillment. Francis Fenelon, who was a 17th century bishop, said, you do not need to be cured, you need to be slain. Quit looking for a remedy and let death come. This is the only way to deal with self. Does that sound strong? I think it's genius. It is, again, the Christian approach to your naughty behavior, to your bad thoughts, to your inner discomforts, is not to feel good about you, is not to rethink your negative thoughts so that you feel good. It is to compare that and recognize where that is in Christ. And it is part of sin nature, and it is a death of self. So Christian parents also teach that. Another distinctive then that is necessary that you can't get away from is the reality of spiritual. We don't believe in Christian ideas. There is a spirit in this room. Our faith is a ghost story, is it not? The Holy Ghost is in me. Ooh. You know, it is the presence of the Spirit of Christ in us. You cannot raise your children as Christians and not regularly be focused on this part. Wait a minute. Did I get ahead? Okay, yeah. Let's go with self-esteem versus God's love. Then we'll come back to the spiritual. The reality of the spiritual means that you are not trying to get your ideas to be right. You are bouncing your life off of God who is watching you. There is a difference between self-esteem and knowing God's love. In Ephesians 3, it is hard to really imagine. You have to go back and read this. By the way, I'll make the slides available for you so they can be emailed. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Our children do not need to know that you're okay, honey. That's okay. I mean, you screwed that up, but I'm sure you'll do better next time. They need to know that, is that how Christ sees you? Do you know I spent my entire life, for most of my life, thinking I was too short. Too short. Compared to what? I still think that. And rarely have I thought of Jesus, who's right here, going, thanks. Thanks a lot. You don't like my work, do you? Not good enough for you? It never occurred to me that I don't own me. How does Jesus see you? As a matter of fact, a big part of our religious life is kind of feeling like, I need to kind of beat myself up a bit. Is that right? Is that our faith? It is to lose yourself. Who are you to judge you at all? I've often thought I wasn't smart enough in certain things. Again, is that right? Is that how God sees me? And especially, and this is where it's important, Paul spends tons of times trying to describe how much we are loved. Loved. It is embarrassing how much Jesus loves you. You, not just us, but both, you. And for us to be going, well, I still should, lose about 30 pounds, or I'm not as smart about this and that, is to ignore the power of his love. Self-esteem is not ever going to happen. You're not going to be able to teach kids to think these positive thoughts about yourself. Instead, you need to think, do you know who Jesus is? Do you know how he sees you? And you start by showing that yourself. This is the difference between self-improvement and Christ in you. Those who are in the flesh cannot please God. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. If, in fact, the Spirit of God dwells in you, anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. There's a different set of motivations in you, that we take the time in the Word, in prayer, and just keeping your spiritual eyes open to see what God, the Spirit, is doing in you. It's the difference tonight between my constant concern of, is this going to be any good, versus being aware that this is what I've been praying about, and I think I'm here to talk to you, and you think you just came here. Jesus has his own agenda for each of us, and it is a matter of actually paying attention to that. And we can get so distracted by mechanical parenting stuff and new techniques of raising self-esteem that we end up not teaching our faith. Christ in you is not the same as self-improvement. So then, this part may surprise you. But the other aspect of Christian faith that is critical is the priority of the interpersonal. I can't tell you if there's anything I'm more concerned about, there's nothing I'm more concerned about than isolation. Our young people particularly are spending more and more time alone. Social relationships are incredibly, they're fragile. There's mobility and so much stuff, we'll talk later, that are distracting us from interpersonal relationships. That is not good for children of any kind, but we are Christians. We are fundamentally told that our relationships together with each other are who we are. It's not optional. You can tell from the weird story in Genesis 2, I want to tell you, look at it when you have time, of God who has made man in his image. God who is one, but is three. So he, remember, makes one. How many humans out of the ground? One. And he goes, yeah, that's not good. What do you mean not good? Doesn't look like me. And remember how he fixed it? He took the rib out of the man and made it into a woman. He did not scoop up more dirt to make another person. She came from him. That's the beginning of humans. And by the way, if you don't think that's important, Matthew 19, when Jesus is asked about marriage, actually he asked about divorce, but he says, reminds them that in the beginning it was not so. Humans are created to be in relationship. There was one man who was ready to completely obey God, and God goes, no, that's not good. And he divided that into a male and female human and said, now that's good. Interaction. Our relationships are incredibly fundamental as Christians. It's more than just good for us. It is a part of obedience in the faith. I had a friend who was a great psychiatrist, Paul Warren, and he used to always say, relationships come first. And that's turned out to be true more than ever. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them. This is Jesus' prayer, that they may be one even as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. This is on and on. This is what Paul is talking about. So we, though many, are one body in Christ and individual members of one another. More and more of families are actually spending lots of time at home alone. And, you know, here's the weird part. It's harder. We're going to talk in a little while about the things that make it hard, like screens, and how comfortable we can be at home. You really can't believe the power of boredom. It's really good for some kids, especially teenagers, to be bored. If you're moderately anxious, you know, and really kind of hard to talk to people, but you're bored out of your skull, you will go and meet with other people. Boredom is helpful. But we are so comfortable together, and for many of your children, they're seeing you doing that. It is really hard, and again, you don't have to feel bad about it. We all feel that. I can go home, I've got this big screen, it's a very comfortable home I got, and we can just sit there alone. That's not just not good for you as humans, it's not Christian. This group, this church is a living body of people, and our relationships are critical, and we cannot parent our children well if we do not put that forward as the primary aspect of who they are. Interpersonal is an essential part of our faith. Remember the gentle parenting? This was the harsh realm of gentle parenting said, what is bewildering about some tenets of gentle parenting is their presentation of a validated child as a solitary child. And a mother is only mother, a self-renouncing, perpetually present humanoid who has nothing but time and who is programmed for nothing but calm. You can tell people are getting tired of this, but I thought was particularly notable is it's true that that kind of parenting, self-awareness, almost never talks about, by the way, that made your sister hurt when you punched her in the nose. Like, let's talk about the other person and how they feel and what's good for them. So the current parenting tends to move away from that. So here's the priorities then of Christian parenting. Number one, love your children. Well, all of you know that. Love your children. Spend time with them. Know them. The main thing that will make it hard for you is fear. This whole overburden of what if I'm screwing it up is actually making it hard for us to just be with our children. Should I be reading now? Should I put on classical music? Maybe I should, get the red dye number 2 out of the house. Just take it easy. Just relax. And love your children. Being distracted with all this stuff we feel like we should do can very often take away from just the main part. I don't have parents that don't love their children. I'm just real busy and really annoyed with stuff. Love means also removing fear. And that's, again, part of our faith. I understand. I live and breathe fear just like you do. But we don't need to be proud of it. It's something to confess because the Lord has cared for us. And the probably most repeated command throughout Scripture is fear not. So being with your children, which means that you can also have presentness, seeing your children as they are. I'll talk more about this in the morning. But there's something very freeing about recognizing that these are not your children. They are not your children. They belong to God. The strengths and weaknesses that you see that they have that you may be really upset about, God is not upset about it. He's certainly not expecting you to figure out how you're going to get around with the dyslexia. What are they going to do? God knows what's going to happen here. It's not your job. Participate, be a part of it, but also clock out in the evening. Let yourself have that freedom of knowing that in the long run, God is more involved and cares more about this child even than I do. And it's not all my job. It allows you to be present and seeing your children as they are. One of the mistakes I made as a parent was that we lived in a small town. We still live in a small town, Celeste. And I had a son that's a little taller than me. Remember, I'm the wrong size. And he was 5'8", and I realized my son could play football. And if you're from Texas, as you know, football, I mean, there's chicks. It's great. This is great. So I took him to football practice, and I put in the tape. I'm not proud of this, but I'm just being honest. I put in the pump 'em up tapes, and I was like, come on, Alex, it's all this stuff. And he was gentle and fearful and, like me. And by 8th grade, 7th grade, he was starting to play for the junior high team. And apparently they used the 7th graders for the 8th graders. They're tackling dummies for the 8th graders who also say some naughty things. And Alex didn't want to play football. But he was having back pain. And we basically, I found myself in a pediatrician's office looking at a doctor telling me, we can't find any real, there might be micro abrasions. About halfway through his speech, I realized, oh my gosh, this guy is trying to tell me that your son doesn't want to play football and is making up stuff to get out of football. I did, because I wanted him to have that. And this temperament that he has, this soft temperament, well, it's been a mess. Now he's a pastor. It's weird, the things that we think, oh, that's no good. That's good. And the Lord is going, would you just step back and watch what happens? Know your children as they are and try not to evaluate them based on what you wish they could be and what they aren't. Another priority that we have to talk about before we take a break is you must discipline your children. And I have to tell you this because discipline is out of fashion. There is just no way for us to talk about what the Bible wants us to do and what, by the way, all of history is known until about 10 minutes ago, about how you raise children. You can't, look, what are you going to do with Proverbs 23? Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. My son, if your heart is wise, my heart too will be glad. I'm not in favor of rod striking, but there's also no way to read that with, well, what they mean is name the feeling, and then that's not what's being talked about. Anytime you talk about God's discipline of us, it's difficult for a time, but it's good for you. It's the old school discipline. But here's the thing. I think one of the reasons that authority is going out of style is two main reasons. One, there's a lot of adults who had parents that didn't have enough relationship to really earn that connection. If you've got a strong disciplinarian, but it's your stepfather that just showed up 2 years ago, that makes it difficult. You haven't really earned that relationship, and that's been very common in the generation of parents of children now. If you haven't earned that connection, then it really turns you off and thinking that any authority is no good. And secondly, and we'll talk about this in the second session, many people experienced over-authoritative parenting way late into adolescence and even into adulthood. Both of those things, I think, make good parental authority seem like it's harmful. So what you want to be aware of is that by showing discipline, you're showing love. For the Lord reproves him who he loves as a father, the son in whom he delights. You cannot get away from that reality that how you discipline your children is how you show love. So how do we show that discipline? How do we do that? First of all, with young children, it is important that you teach your young children self-control, that you help them to push against their own instincts. If you have a hyperactive kid, ADHD for example, they're very impulsive. You need to help them work against that so that by 1 year old, certainly by 2, you're helping to teach them self-control. If you ever look, I don't know if you know anything about Jordan Peterson, who is not a Christian, so I recommend him with caution. He wrote a really good book called 12 Rules for Life. And rule number 5 is a genius. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. If you don't like your, and his chapters are thick, he goes on with all kinds of research that if you don't like your kid, other people don't like your kid, and they're going to spend their whole life having to deal with it, nobody likes me. He even goes on to say that if a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him or her to make friends. And you're seeing a generation of people that we can't even get on the airplane together. I have to have my security donkey to sit next to me, and you need to get out of my way or I'm going to flip out. The ability to be together is getting harder and harder. We don't know how to control ourselves. But this is the important part. You do this because of dealing with other people. It is how you teach your children to have self-control, and you do it without provoking them. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. What that means is that you limit the rules. You shouldn't have tons of rules. Make them important, make them clear, and figure out what to do when one of them gets broken. Use the least force necessary to enforce the rules. So among the books that I've recommended is, and I'll talk about this again in a little while, is Parenting with Love and Logic. Is a very good resource for if you're doing it right, you should be acting in discipline far more than with words. Most of the young parents I see are using way too many words. There's a description that's helpful to give enough words, but words alone won't happen. Action quicker, letting your children know that I mean it. If you do not come to me when I call you, I'm going to go over there and grab you and you'll have time out or something will be negative. If they know you mean it, then you don't have to be going, come on, I say, hey, wait, you shouldn't have to do that because you're not acting early enough. You're saying it over and over again. And if you tell a child with that normal sin nature, it is normal for your kid to instinctively, by 4 and 5, they know when you mean it and when you don't. They know when you're saying, you better come right now, and they know that, not yet. You better, hey, now I better go. But you could back all that up, do it earlier and mean it, but also be careful about what rules you have that they are not overburdensome, but that they are the kind of rules that are clear and they are consistent, and especially with younger children, it's self-control, so they can serve other people. 1, 2, 3 Magic is a good book. Anyone use that? I like that. One of my kids used it, and I remember they were at our house with the grandchildren, and there was lots of, hey, whatever, and then one day they came over and their kid was doing something, and my daughter went, that's a 1. They stopped. I was like, what was that? It was a pretty simple method of, it's not magic. Well, okay, it is magic, but it's just it is one way of signaling clearly when you are going to act. And so I liked it. It was good for little children. Parenting with Love and Logic. And then I really like James Dobson's book, The Dare to Discipline. I think it's a very good book. It's funny how that's not as popular anymore. I don't know why. The most research done on parenting is on the effectiveness of authoritative parenting, not authoritarian, that is not connected and over-demanding, Also not low expectation, kind of chaotic parenting, but authoritative, high involvement, high expectation, and high limit setting and clarity. There's no comparison that that's the most effective kind of parenting. So with older children, we'll take a break in just a minute, you're going to be talking more about character. And again, interpersonal is part of what we mean as Christians. You're teaching your children to connect with other people, to connect together in church, to be able to be effective with other people is a critical part of Christians. Much, much more than, yeah, but do they feel good? And that's useless when it comes to being part of the church. Character includes the stuff you know about, teaching honesty, diligence, kindness. Those are the things that is not news to anyone. But Peterson says, act so that other people are happy you're around, so that people will want you around. A child who knows these rules will be welcome everywhere. It is an important part of their social relationship. You are living among a generation of young people who do not know how to interact with each other. If I have one more teenager greet me in the lobby with, hey, how you doing, whatever, I don't do that. I'm like, whoa, back up. Come at me again, grab my hand, look me in the eye and say hello. And I'm a shrink. But it's like, this isn't good for you. You need to be able to talk to each other and say hello and all that. I remember years ago, we lived near Bonham, which is way out, and I was in this barbecue place, and it's that place that's been there forever. There's a line of people, and there was that booth with those 80-year-old curmudgeons that probably meet there every day. And they're sitting there, and there's this lady with her 2-year-old daughter. She's holding her, and the girl is looking at this 80-year-old dude who's old, and he waves. And her mother sees what's happening. She said, can you say hi? And she was, can you say hi? And all of a sudden, these people that I don't even know if they knew each other are doing this dance of this is how you do things. He'll wave and you say hi. That's how we interact with it. It's training children to do the dance of interpersonalness, which is Christian. It is critical as for our faith. And then lastly, we're going to rush through this real quick, I promise. You must teach the faith at home. You must teach your faith at home. If you bring your kids here, and as good as these professional folks are, but you don't really talk about it much at home, or if your children, and they know you, how the Cowboys are going to do this season is much more interesting than the incarnation or the sacrificial substitutionary death of Christ, if you can get a lot more energy when it comes to this next election and what in the world is going to happen, they know what you really believe in. You must teach the Christian faith at home. That's always been kind of true. Now it's almost guaranteed that if you only come here some and hope that these good people will just teach your children all they need, you will not have done all you can do. It will not be enough. Again, coming to the faith is a spirit matter. I get that. But you will not have done enough. I don't even know you. If you come here once, maybe twice a month, it's not going to be enough. It doesn't demonstrate that we are a body. It makes this a part-time thing that we do. You could kind of get away with that 60 years ago when I was a kid, but you can't do that now. You must teach the faith. By example, they will know what you're doing, but obviously how the Bible says. You will teach the children, talking of them when you're sitting in your house and when you're walking by the way, when you lie down and when you rise. Talking about it in your own life. If you have teenagers who don't like to be taught, you describe your own stuff. Hey, I know that you don't want to hear this, but I'm just going to tell you, this is me. I was praying this morning and tell them about your experience. But your little children, you sit them down and we're having regular Bible study. I know that these people have resources for you, but you must do this at home. Otherwise, it will absolutely demonstrate that this is a part-time thing. It includes so I go to an Anglican church, we call it catechesis. It's the general truth more than just how do I get saved. It is the larger answer to questions like, who is God? What are we by nature? Answer, we are a part of God's creation, made in the image of God. How did God first help us? He helped us by revealing himself. Just the general truth of all that we know of who we are and how we have been reconciled to God and who God is. It must be happening constantly in your home. And then lastly, it is critical that you help your children find their identity in serving others, in your relationships, who you are with each other. It is weird how, as a therapist, I do marriage therapy. Most of the time, you'll find that people do relationship therapy. I don't do relationship therapy. If you're married, I want to talk to you. If you're engaged, maybe. If you're dating, relationship is such an empty word. There is marriage, there are mothers and fathers, there are brothers and sisters. These are critical relationships that we need to teach. Codependency has become, the expressive individualism will actually tell you that you need to be careful that you're not overly dependent on these relationships in your family. What? Like you can't expect for your spouse to make you happy. Okay, but it's a pretty big deal if my wife is unhappy. I mean, I don't know, if you're married, you know what I mean? Like, how you act with each other is a big deal. But this expressive individualism would say, no, that's an illusion. That's codependency. No, I think it's marriage. I think it's kind of Christ in the church. I think it's part of the stuff of life. Rather than to pretend to be this isolated individual that isn't affected by my spouse or anyone, how about learn to serve each other and make your spouse happy? How about teaching your children to honor you and you love them that pleases them? How about we learn to support each other? So codependency, I'll just real quick. Codependency came from Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a true thing that there were many, and mostly men, that when they got sober, their marriages fell apart. And they came up with, wait a minute, it turns out there are marriages that are dependent on the dependency. The marriage depended on that person being dependent on alcohol. Do you see what I mean? The idea that, no, it just means two people depending on each other too much, that's not a thing. That's called marriage. I mean, just on the way over here, because of the way my wife acted toward me, I got upset. And we had to talk it through, because we're married. That's kind of what that is. So that's a fallacy. The priority of marriage is critical. Your children must see you working in your marriage. If you're divorced or struggling in your marriage, you must not give up on that as a priority relationship. Mothers and fathers do not parent the same, and you must have enough strength together to work that through. A mother is not a mother and father, and a father is not a father and a mother. There are two different people that do that part well, but it is not you can't substitute them. Brothers and sisters, how you help your brother, how you help your sister. If I could do anything, I would increase what I taught my kids about how to help each other. We did some of that, but I wish we had done a lot more about that this is your family. This is who you support. And lastly, before we finish, your children need to be asked about their best friends. You know, your best friend forever, BFFs? You're not going to be friends with groups, but especially starting in grade school and into adolescence, it is really important that you encourage and track your children's close friendships. Who are you friends with? What happened to Connor? Oh, yeah, well, we don't talk anymore. What do you mean? He was your closest friend. You need to talk that through with him. Teaching your children to connect and stay connected longer will become increasingly an unusual thing. It's a Christian thing. Again, it's okay, you'll have a group of acquaintances, and that's fine, but what about your one or two friends? If you are blessed with close friendships, and I'm talking to the men here, mostly white men don't have close friends, but you should. It's a Christian thing to have someone that knows all of your stuff and you share with each other. It's a huge part of our faith. It is how we connect. The faith is an us. It's not an I. So I would encourage you to not only do that yourself as individuals, as couples, but also encouraging your children in those relationships. So we're going to break. I promise the next part will be a little more practical and easier, but I just want to finish by saying this. I am concerned about how we're approaching parenting. And I'm praying hard for you and hope that we'll start some discussions about how we can encourage our children separate from the world that is telling them to draw within yourself, know yourself, and find this authentic you. We draw into Jesus and lose ourselves and find who we truly are in Christ in us. So we'll talk more after the break. Thank you.
Your word will never fail me, like a fire in my bones, like a whisper to my soul. Your word is
Check, check. Check 1, 2. Check, check. Check 1. Check 2. Check, check. Check, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. We're good.
the king of my heart, be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he's my song. And let the king of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he's my song. Yes, you are good. You're good. Oh, 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 now let the king of my heart be the wind inside my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he's my song. Let the king of my heart be the fire inside my veins, the echo of my days. Oh, he is my, oh, sing it again. Let the king of my heart caught up in your presence. I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessing. Jesus, you don't owe me anything. And more than anything that you can do, I just want you. Oh, I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. Oh, Jesus. Oh, I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you.
All right. All right.
I'm caught up in your presence.
Tess. Hello. Hey, it's time to get started again. We want to make sure we get you guys out of here by 7:30 so that you have time to go home, get a full night, 12 hours of sleep, so you're ready for church tomorrow. So let's welcome back Dr. Ken Wilgus.
So the things that you need to accomplish, the things we're trying to accomplish that focus on not how you see yourself, but how God sees you. Focusing on how you interact with other people, which means our discipline is focused and important on helping our children to be able to interact and be socially available for each other, to be loving, to be a part of a church. So there's some major obstacles to these things, and we need to talk specifically about them. Things that are going to be hard for you. Now remember what I started with, not doing that parenting thing to make you feel bad. This is stuff we're all struggling with. But I want to tell you the things that are the most important that keep coming up in my office. Screens. And I don't mean just social media and whatever, literally the screens. Have you ever thought about how many screened devices do you have in your possession? When I was a kid, I can tell you how many. One. It was the weird big tube on the little spindly, I don't even know why they did that. It was one television. And I'm not going to kid you, my dad was an electrical dude. We watched a lot of TV. Nothing compared to now. And it is difficult to, so the first thing is to actually take notice of how many screen devices you own. The last kid I had who his parents took his phone, by the next day had four, count them, four old phones from his friends that could access Wi-Fi. He was fine. Like, it's incredible how much screens happen and how much it takes your attention away from what you're doing. I am telling you this for two reasons. One, I'm a psychologist, I see it. And number two, as my family will tell you, I am an addiction waiting to happen. I look at screens constantly. And it is like my biggest thing has always been news. I look at the news like I'm Secretary of Defense, like I need to know now. Relax, it's fine. You don't need to do that. So, just as an example, this is my phone. Anyone know what that is? Give you a dollar. Very nice. Light phone, Lightphone, light phone, not making money from it. That's what I have. You know why I have this? Because I stare at screens all the time. This is not a dumb phone. It is a specifically limited phone. There is no picture that you can even get on this, but it's texting, calls, podcasts, music, but it just, I guarantee you, I don't go, hey, it's just this. But this is an example of things that, I'm not kidding, as parents and as a church, when will we begin to talk together about how are we going to rethink this? Do you know what wait until 8 is? That's a movement to not give your children a cell phone until they're in 8th grade. That's a pretty good movement. That makes sense. It would be cooler if we as a church were encouraging each other. That's what I mean by a conversation. It's really hard to do this yourself. And that's why I show you my phone, not because look at me, how good I am. I know that I'm weak. Do you know where you're weak? And do you know how to really make some important differences? These things are designed to pull you in. Did you see The Social Dilemma, that documentary? If you haven't, look for it. It's creepy how much these things in your pockets are actually pulling you toward them. So it's important to really rethink. I think a pretty good book is the TechWise Family. Is still pretty relevant by Andy Crouch, but there's a lot more resources that some of you know of and can find out. But I'm not kidding. What's important to rethink isn't just which apps and so forth. It's important to start rethinking. We put these phones in a basket. They stay in here. You don't have them all day. And not just your children, you. It's not good for you to have that thing in bed an hour before you're trying to sleep. It's the blue. You know this, but you know you're still doing it. I would if I had it. I mean, we just do. When will we get serious about it? Because I'm not kidding. It interferes with parenting. It's weird to go to a coffee shop and see the number of good people, parents with sweet children, and they're doing this, or their children are doing this. This is bad for our kids. All the research shows it is bad. We need to limit that, the screens. Another major problem for all of us is essentially chaos of two major things. One, time. We are busy, 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 and our children are busy. And it's become a kind of norm that, you know how it is, I'm busy. That should not be the norm. We really need to push back as hard as you can about what are you committed to. And just as importantly, how much do your children need to be involved in? This kind of, for example, more than one sport at a time. God forbid, could they go a whole season and not be in a sport, waiting for a few weeks for the next sport? These are things that very often feel like, I mean, it's good for our kids, but for Christian parents, it pulls us away from home and from each other and from church. So getting a hold of time, having leisure time, having margin where we've got nothing to do. When is the last time you had nothing going on for a whole day and you weren't on vacation? That used to not be that unusual. We feel guilty if we're doing that. Is that what our Lord is asking? Is that what he demands? You know, one of the fruits of the Spirit is peace. Peace. Quiet. Being able to have a home that includes downtime. Time. Again, back to the parent thing. Don't feel guilty, but just push back against it. And the other is that if you're an old guy like me, it's your stuff. I'm old enough that when I was growing up, you took care of your stuff. You need to take care of it. You're not going to have many of them. That's not really true now. Many families have lots of stuff, and you really have to get good at getting rid of stuff. Like one in, one out. And some of you are pretty good at this. As an old person, it still stuns me. Like, you're not going to keep your plastic cup that you got from Buc-ee's and whatever? Yeah, no, chunking it. You know, you have to deal with stuff, or you'll end up like, and if you're older, you know what I mean, you have to go to your parents' house after they've died, and there's a ton of stuff. And we did that with my folks, and guess what? My house I'm trying to I don't want them to have to do that. Stuff, chaotic stuff. So with your children, always remember that fewer choices is better for children. There's studies that show that when they have lots of stuff, lots of options, they actually do less creative work, and they're more anxious. So it is really better to establish habits with your children of, hey, it's Christmas, so remember, one in, one out. So if you get 4 things, you got to pick out the 4 things that are going out. The kind of thing that can help deal with this tidal wave of stuff that has changed even in my lifetime. I've already mentioned to you isolation. It is essential that you push against this, that you find your friendships here in the church, other Christians that you reconnect with, and be persistent, because otherwise what really affects that a whole lot is amusement. Our children expect to be entertained all the time, and so do we. It is weird. Again, this is, I'm only telling you this because it wasn't that long ago. When I loved a TV show and it finished, we couldn't wait for next week. 7 days for the next one. I never do that now. I'm like, well, it's only 2 a.m. Let's just do another season. You know, this is creepy. But we have to be firm about it, and I'm not kidding. If you can't talk together after tonight about what will we do, starting with agreeing together that I'm not good at this, are you good at it? No, we're not good at this. Then what can we do to encourage each other? That's what the church body is for. It is so easy now to make this a place of dispensing religious goods and services. And we come here, we hope we hear something good, we go back to our little home, little hobbit trail from here to here to here, and we don't know each other. That's not Christian. It's not our faith. And your children will not stay in the faith. They will see the big vision out there, which is all about, it's all about yourself and being alone. All right, so we're going to move on real quick to the next thing, which isn't it? Do you know how to load that up? Can you see it? We didn't even talk about this. It's the next thing. Gee, as soon as I get one thing fixed, we have something else. But, so real quick, here's the other big message. Because there's really only 2 main things that I'm trying to say. One is that we, do you want me to come out and do that? Do you see where it is? Oh. Thanks for doing this, by the way. I told those guys, you know, when you do that stuff back there and it all goes great, nobody notices. The first time the only time you ever notice back there is when it doesn't work and everyone's like, who's that back there? So I really appreciate it. So this is the part that I spend most of my time on, and this is, my book has a whole lot in this. By the way, the other book that I didn't mention that I think is really important, that fits with all that I'm talking about, is Gary Thomas's Sacred Parenting. It's just a good dive into recognizing and continually thinking through the sanctification process of how God is working in your life through your raising your children. The things that happen with your children. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that my kid is vaping. Jesus is not going, vaping? Well, I mean, it's like, yeah, I knew. Is that today? Okay, yes. And then it's all part of our faith and remaining close to him and looking for what is God doing in and through this child in our own life, in teaching us to, and surely you're getting better at this, let go. Recognize what you don't have control over. Parenting by the time you get to be teenagers is very often, when you have teenagers, is like that 2-year-old that used to be in the back seat with the play steering wheel, and you feel like you're driving the car. You're not. Your teenager's driving the car, and you're trying to keep everything on the road, and you don't have a lot of control. And those are the times that our children can tell what we really believe in and what we don't. Sally and I discovered this. One of our kids was dating that boy. We didn't think that was a good thing, and it was so bad that we were kneeling and praying in our bed, asking God to take care of this for us, and I felt peace from the bed to the bedroom door. But I don't think much past that. I picked it back up again. You know, you can't trust Jesus with these things. What are we going to do? It's that kind of recognition that God is working in your life. These struggles are not God hoping that you don't screw it up. It's him teaching you as well. I am here. This thing you're going through is part of you and me as well. Did we get it? Okay. All right. 1 sec. Talk amongst yourselves. Smoke if you need to. It's a keynote. Oh. So it's yeah. All right, let me real quickly tell you the main thing that we need to know, and then we'll do a lot of questions and answers. We're going to just skip through some of this. Here's one of the main things you need to know. To be powerful and effective with your children, I think you should pour it on while they're children. Involvement, discipline, teaching, all that stuff. I think it's important. Listen, if you've got, most of you, I assume both of you work. It's very hard now to be able to stay at home. But if you can afford one of you to stay home, the time to do it is up till 12, if you can. Because you want to be involved and connected in teaching and all that kind of stuff. Because, and this is the thing, childhood is over by the age of 13. You're done with raising your children at 13. Just relax. You're not done with involvement with them, but and this is easy because this is all in my book, so you can look up this later. But we invented teenager. What you think of as a teenager, surly, they don't like to talk to you, they're rebellious, all that stuff, did not exist 120 years ago, ever. That whole thing that we call teenager was invented about 3 generations ago. That thing that we call teenager doesn't exist in many cultures today. The Inuit up in Canada do not have 14-year-olds going, I don't need my parents. They don't even know what you're talking about, because all throughout history, everyone knew that childhood is over by 13. Americans invented adolescence. It is not a natural phenomenon. Adolescence is a social construct created by an urban industrial society that keeps its young at home far past puberty. There is still a necessary period of training, but this is training of young adults. Again, what's important to be effective as Christians is both to have this kind of heavy involvement, teaching our children to be social connected, to be self-controlled, all these things. But here's the part that almost never happens. And then by 13, you start, not fully, but you start stepping back and handing over more and more freedom to this young adult. And that's what adolescents are. They are adults in training. They are young adults, not old children. No one ever thought that they were before. I'm skipping through fast. We have now the never-ending childhood. We've created a new disorder, extended childhood disorder, characterized by feelings of hopelessness, anger, and a lack of control over one's life. You see it over and over again. There's more and more adults who are still not effective in doing anything, and they just kind of don't want to get out of that spot. And corollary, we have the eternal parent. Remember that movie Parenthood? Did you ever see that with Jason Robards? There is no end zone. You never cross the goal line, spike the ball, and do your touchdown dance. Never. Yes, you do. No one's ever thought that before. No one's ever thought that you're always having to worry and always be involved with your children in whether they like it or not. That's not true. And it's important as Christians to be effective that, ironically, while we would be disciplining and expecting and all that stuff, no one expects this, that by 13, you then change course and begin a more effective approach. You ever notice why we get one story after Jesus' birth? The only childhood story we get is what? He's going to the temple. They went once a year, his 12th year. Why that year? Probably because in Judaism, 13th was always a point of entering into being a son of the covenant. Or as the ancient rabbi always said, up until 13, I talked to my son about God. After 13, I talked to God about my son. There is something that has changed significantly. In other cultures, in Galatians 4, when Paul is talking about the law and grace, he makes the analogy of children and adults. The heir, as long as he is a child, is no different from a slave, though he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by the father. That's another culture that had, again, an end point, where when are you finished, you're not a child, now you're an adult. You live in a culture that has lost track of how to enter our young people into adulthood. So I'm going to move ahead here. So it's critical that you begin to think about that you parent for children, like we already talked about, being involved and teaching and training and all that kind of thing. But I can't tell you enough that it is super effective, and some of you know this, you know my stuff, that when you change course by 13 you talk to your children and announce to them that they're an adult. Now relax, they're an adult, they are still incredibly poor, they own nothing, and they're very inexperienced, but they are adults. So that means that you begin to recognize some freedoms. In the book, I describe it all. It's like being an army, an occupied army in your teenager's life. That's how they see you. Ever notice that? You know, like, why are you telling me what to do with my phone? Well, it's actually my phone. But that they want their own freedom. And so you begin to announce to them that we are going to be moving out of your life in an orderly fashion. Not all at once, and certainly not as fast as you hope, but we will be out of your life. This will all be up to you. In my house, and that woman had to put up with the mad scientist me, we did this. At 13, my children were told, happy birthday, here's your whatever, and you don't have to clean your room anymore. That's up to you now. You can keep food in there as long as you can afford an exterminator, but since you can't, freedom always comes with responsibility, so it'll cost you $1 for every plate, whatever. Oh, here's the washer and dryer. With freedom also comes responsibility. You need to take care of your own stuff, but you can handle your room however you want. You can go to any PG-13 movie you want to. Every year when my kids turned 13, there was some movie that was just, that shouldn't have been PG-13. But not all of my kids went to that film as soon as they could. When you're told that that's up to you now, that can produce a somewhat different motivations. I think we also, let me see, this needs to happen. You can listen to whatever music you want to. If you have a teenager and you're still saying, well, you can't listen to music that has those lyrics in it, you're looking silly. Unless you're Amish, your teenager is listening to whatever music they want. Go to YouTube, look up whatever worst song you know of, and look at the number of plays. YouTube, billions of plays. Like, it's just, so instead, you recognize that freedom. Hey, now that you're 13, that needs to be up to you, between you and God. And now, if we catch your little sister listening to it, you're going to lose your phone for a day, because that's, with freedom comes responsibility. But you need to make your own decisions. This is powerful. Parents that are authoritative with children, who then, and have established that control, and then readily are handing that control over, so that by the time they finish high school, that's when you're done, when your kid finishes high school. Because pretty much after that, if you still think, well, he's finished high school, but he's really about 14, no one out here will help you. When you call the police when your 18-year-old is out past, he's 18, but he's really 14, no one will help you. He's an adult. He has to be seen that way. That you have to let them know that. We are now recognizing that this is up to you now. Does that scare you? Well, a lot of you know my book, so you're not as frightened by it. But the point is that you'll provide two major lists. One is a freedoms list, that not privilege. Privilege is a good thing, and is that's what Jim Foster Cline and Jim Fay talk about. The more that you handle yourself will let you have more privilege. That's not what I'm talking about. After this comes this. And this is giving freedoms because you're too old for us to answer for you. For example, sweetheart, you know we don't like your friends. But at 15, they're your friends. So you make your own decision about those friends. We want to be clear about that. Why? Ever had the discussion with your 15-year-old about, I just don't think she's a very good friend? How does that go? Go good, does it? You don't even know her. She's not arguing about the friend. She's arguing, why are you still telling me how to handle this? When will you be out of my life? And all we're talking about is orderly saying, in these areas, we're out. In these areas, we're out. In these areas, we will be out, but not yet. So that with teenagers that want freedom to go to that party that you think is terrible, the answer is never no. It is not yet. And the other list, by the way, it's all here, is an expectations and consequences. On the things that you say no to, you need to be effectively, make sure that you mean it. With teenagers, you're not a policeman, you're a judge. If your kid is out after curfew and you're a policeman, you have to text, you have to go over there, a judge sits at home and goes, man, this is going to be bad. It's 15 minutes, and you decide what the consequence will be, and you make it stick. So it's both. It is freedom, but it is also recognizing the limits until they leave your home. Does that make sense to you? Here's the main point I want to get to before we have questions. I can't tell you how powerful that is. Authoritative, the problem with parenting with a kind of, with little children where you're sort of a consultant, did that make you frustrated? Whatever. Then when you hand over freedom, it's not much. You know, a lot of our kids don't even want to be adult. They don't go to get their driver's license at 16. You know why? Because we are taking them wherever they need, anytime they need it. And why would I do that? I'm just going to have to take my brother everywhere. It's better that we not be as available and not providing so much, and even our children unhappy with us at points because they don't think we've been nice. And by 13 and 14, as Christian parents, we're saying, this is now time more and more that your life is between you and God, including whether you believe our faith or not. It is so weird to be talking to a teenager that I'll say, well, what are you praying for? Oh, I'm not a Christian. Oh, sorry, you're the leader of your youth praise band. I thought you were a believer. Yeah, don't tell my parents. That's incredibly useless. Your children need to know, hey, dude, I love today's sermon. What do you think? You're 15. Do you even agree with all this stuff? They need to know that you know that thought isn't up to us. We know that you're an adult and must think for yourself. What do you think? You can show that freedom in ways that even, by senior year, I recommend you take a time when you say, look, you do not have to go to church anymore. Before you leave our house, maybe spring of senior year, should be a late thing, but you can do that so that they can know, you can see where they are in their faith, and they can know that you know that this isn't obedience to us, it's between you and God. It's about introducing our young adults into adulthood right here at home. Because the very common problem in strong Christian families is that our children get the message that at this home, you will not be able to grow up, you just have to get away. And you need to be able to say, no, you will grow up right here in our home because we will recognize the adulthood that God has made you. My whole point is that those two things, the things we just talked about, real self-control, real discipline, producing character, all that up until 12, and then turning that into a training and inviting your children into the adulthood with you is an incredibly powerful combination. Not to make sure your kids are okay. You can't make sure your kids are okay. It's to be effective with your children and grandchildren. So we got to take the time now for questions because I love specifics and questions and so forth. So fire away, and I'm going to wait an uncomfortable number of seconds until we have, because I'm not kidding. Yes, ma'am.
I have not read the book yet.
What? You have not read the? It's okay. It's okay. I just need to. Okay.
So it might be in there, and you can tell me just read it if that's the answer. But what do you do if you have this child that you've raised to this point of 12, 13 is here, but they're not at a place of accepting the responsibilities of an adult yet? What do you do there?
Yes, so it's a good question. Even at 13, 12, 13, they're not accepting those responsibilities. It's incredibly important. I'm glad you asked that. The idea that what you need to do is to step back so they will then take on this, sort of adultness is not what I'm talking about. It is recognizing the reality that after 13, they have freedoms that we either recognize or pretend that we don't, and often they will not step up like they should have or we hope for. And in those cases, that's why you start small. Natural consequences of those things need to fall on them instead of us. What we end up doing is what they think is mean and always telling us, we're trying to protect you from the bad consequences. So a messy room where, the first time she comes out and goes, quick, this needs to be ironed, and you go, that's a bummer. You should, I hate that. It's worth 5 speeches about cleanliness. It's letting that happen so that the backing off of things, again, isn't just as a technique so they will step up and take hold of stuff. Teenagers will surprise you, but I'm glad you asked that. I can't emphasize enough, that goes back to that, what I'm describing isn't parenting like a technique that causes this in kids. Now, I'm not gonna kid you, when you start doing freedom, I have a lot of stories of how stunning, teenagers are stunned. Like they'll stop you in the middle and go, wait, this is stuff I don't have to do? And yeah, this is up to you now. They don't believe you. So it's powerful, but not in the sense of after that, she stepped up and kept her room, that's not what I mean. It means the orderly process of preparing them, because after 13, when a child is able to have a child, that's not really a child anymore. And the world has always known that until in the West about 120 years ago. So that comes up a lot. That's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
I have a son who's 13 and a half, inattentive, ADHD, has trouble following through on daily tasks, and when reminded is very remorseful that he's forgotten, and it's hard to discipline that with his remorse. So how do you go about disciplining in that scenario? Because I don't think that his brain is always in that mode.
Sort of, and I don't have time to get into, by the way, another thing I do have concern about is we are very enamored with brain science, and the problem is that many of you are reading books about the frontal lobe and all this stuff, and it always ends up with an infantilizing, like, well, this kid can't be expected to, well, before we knew the brain science, we always had 13-year-olds that couldn't remember their homework and things like that. So I think that's a good example of a sweet kid. The fact that he knows that he's ADHD, or at least has that awareness, is good, but you add to that respect that, hey, I know you're sorry and that's great, but I told you I'm not going to bring your stuff up to the school, and so that's up to you. So it does include advising him more. Definitely what often happens is in school, and maybe your boy isn't like this yet, but very commonly, even though he's not doing great, I don't want you to help me with stuff.
His is more daily tasks at home, like every night you take a shower. Why haven't you gone and taken it? School, he is very intelligent.
Yeah, there's not ADHD enough that makes it impossible to remember to take a shower. He just doesn't, I have a lady that takes care of that for me. So it's, yeah. So, but here's the tricky part. At 13, are you still going to be wanting to put consequences for not showering? By that point, he's a young man, and it's probably better for someone to go, dude, are you hoping to get a date sometime? Because this ain't going to work. But respecting that, and again, that respect, and I should mention, by recognizing freedoms, it opens up communication like you can't believe. It gives you much better opportunity to say, dude, you're still not doing this. What are you going to do? And help him to creatively think through what is he going to do. So it's funny because being remorseful about it and believe, that's really good when he's 8, 9. By 13, 15, I'm glad you're sorry, but what are you going to do? It's not my deal, it's your deal. Yes, sir.
I've got it all figured out.
I did hear that. It's true.
But like your spouse is on the same page.
Yes. These women. Yes. I'm glad you asked that. What about when you and your spouse are on the same page? Number one, it's very common because fathering is the natural fathering style and natural mothering styles. Again, I know there's individual, but there's some standard stuff. Mothers tend to be good at nurturing. I can tell she hasn't had her nap. She needs to, this is what my kid needs. I will provide for it. I'll kill you to provide for it for my kid. That's good nurturing. Fathers, I call it warrior training. Ever since kids are little, I just look at the kid going, yeah, if we keep doing that for him, he's not going to do it himself. And, it bugs me at Walmart to see some kid talking to his mom. It's like, not because I'm worried about that kid's mother. It's, yeah, that kid's never going to make it if he keeps, it's this always forward thinking kind of thing. So the key is to recognize that that's not a parenting problem. The main thing, it's a marriage issue. You talk to each other as married people and learn to trust each other because we're both the parents here. Mothers can be easily suspicious of father's roughhousing. Certainly by adolescence, this whole thing I just talked to you about with the freedom tends to come more naturally to fathers, as I always say, because we never had these children in us. It will feel like you're being unloving if you let your 15-year-old go off and I see his track shoes there and I'm not going to say anything. That just feels wrong. But a dad is like, nah, it's fine. It's his problem. And to make both of those work, and here's the key, to make both of those work, you have to learn how to trust each other. Dads, I'm not kidding, when that wife of yours is getting it wrong, you need to I'm talking to you first, dads. You need to, listen, you need to make sure your wife hears that you hear what she's concerned about, that you listen to her. When her fears, so if we didn't send them to private school next year, let me see, you're worried that, and if her fears come out of your mouth, she's very relieved. The biggest thing, the hardest thing for wives is, I feel alone in this. So it makes a huge difference that you, before pushing things or whatever, do all you can to communicate. I want to know what your concern is. I want to know, and I hear it. Not I get it. I mean, it's an actual series of conversations so that she feels reassured that even if you disagree with her, I think he gets me. That makes a huge difference to wives. Am I doing it well, women? Is that? Thank you. All right, because wives taught me this. Women, when you talk to your husband, I know he seems like an adult, but in your eyes, he feels like a loser. He is pretty sure you don't respect what he's saying. You don't appreciate what I'm trying to, just like this. We're super sensitive to you. So he needs to hear from you, look, I mean, if this is what you prayerfully think we should do, I mean, I'm going to follow you, but I'm going to tell you how I feel about it. That's a big difference from, really, is that what you think we should do? He thinks you're saying he's an idiot. So if men are careful to support their wives' sense of connection, wives need to be helpful in helping their husbands to feel competent. That is virtually always what he is when he's not listening to me. It's because he thinks you're saying he's an idiot. And that's not what you're saying, but it helps him if you will remind him. Listen to men talk to each other. If men have a difference, they'll apologize. Dude, it's none of my business, and it's probably your thing. But they do a lot of this. Hey, it's to make sure that you don't tell the other guy what to do. Men, am I close? Right? Women don't hear that, and so it's helpful to talk as married people. Is what I'm getting at. It's a good question. Married people don't bring out, well, this book says that married people start with, sweetheart, what are you fearful of? I want to know what you're worried about. I don't want to do it if it's going to leave you upset. But listen, if you think this is where we should go, I mean, you're the dad, that's what it sounds like. And most often, both of you are right in a different direction. To have three-dimensional kind of vision with your children, you're both needed. So talk as married people. And dude, we're out of time. So I'm going to hang around a little bit if there's other questions. This is way better than I thought it'd be. Appreciate all y'all being here. And again, last thing I'll mention before I pray for us, I really hope that you will, after tonight, find the opportunity to talk together about what do we want to be doing here to support each other. Because you can't do this alone. God made a human alone and said, yep, that's not good, and divided that into a man and a woman who made children, and that's who we are. And Christ is our bridegroom, and we are his bride, one body. Our relationship together is critical. And now more than ever, because the world is telling your kids to think about yourself and how you feel and be you. And it's not Christian. It's anti-human. And we are very soon to become the only lights that know this, because you're going to look weird. You need to gather together to be supported in this kind of parenting. So I want to pray for us, because I just hope that the Spirit will stay with us in this effort. So in my church we say, you'll answer, and also with you. The Lord be with you. Gracious Father God, I praise you for tonight. Lord, I know this has not been the information session that I like to mostly do, but Lord, I pray that these words, your scripture, your Spirit enlivening your word would speak to us to be bold in a way that is different from our neighbors. Lord, give us the strength to know our own weakness. Lord, show us how to die to self, to let go of our parenting concerns, but instead to watch for what you are doing and to enthusiastically involve ourselves in a work that is yours. Lord, we again right now give these children to you, and we confess and are sorry for picking them up as if they are ours. Show us how to do this. Show us our children as they really are, and in so doing, Lord, show us who we really are, especially in the eyes of a father like you who loves us and has given up everything to come get us. We praise you for it. We thank you again and again in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus. Amen.
Let's thank Ken. You is available on Audible. So if you like to listen to books, it'd be worth it doing that way. I mean, honestly, like, it's a really good book. I started listening to it, and like I'm thinking, this is really good. I called Ken. I said, seriously, you wrote this? It really, seriously. I mean, like, all my kids are in their 20s, and it was a big help to me. So anyway, that's a great option. Also, there's a podcast that you do. Can you just yell about that real quick? So just search for that, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, and tons of episodes on that. Also, tomorrow morning, Ken's going to be speaking in both hours of worship, so make sure you're here for that. Don't forget the books on the back table. We obviously have to flip the room for tomorrow morning, so if you have time available and hang around, that'd be great. Don't feel like you got to, but we would really greatly appreciate it. But again, thanks so much for being here tonight. It's a great group. So Lord bless you. You're dismissed.